Okay, Senator, if you're on Alessa already, I think we should just go ahead and get started. We have such limited time. I don't want to wait any longer. Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to each of you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on a Friday in the summer, nonetheless. My name is Sherri Powell, and I am the founder of Yours Rurally. I am joined today by my co-host and fellow rurally based entrepreneur, Alissa Hessler, who is the founder of Urban Exodus and Hessler Creative. And of course, we're delighted to be joined today by our distinguished guest of honor and featured speaker, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, the founder of the One Country Project. I like to say that Senator Heitkamp represented the folks of North Dakota from 2013 to 2019 during her Senate tenure, and now she represents all rural Americans across this nation. One quick housekeeping item before I turn the floor over to Alessa to formally introduce the senator. We're going to spend the first 40 minutes or so in conversation using some prepared questions, and then we'd love to take questions from you all, any questions that you may have. So the chat function in this webinar will remain open through the duration of the event, so feel free to raise your hand and we will pop the chat open so that you can put your questions in. We only have 1 hour together today, and I can already tell you that isn't enough time. There's so much to talk about, so much to discuss. I think it goes without saying that this upcoming election is the most critical, the most important of our lifetimes. What's at stake for rural America and rural Americans is candidly everything. And that's why we're all here this morning. And another thank you for being here. Senator, I do want to tell you one quick thing before we jump in. Alessa and I have spent quite a bit of time over the past few days preparing for today. And one of the themes that has come up over and over is just how nervous we are about appearing on camera today. We don't do things like this often. We are typically spending the day running our small businesses in our respective rural hometowns. And neither of us are political strategists. We're not policy experts. We've never been media trained. So if we appear nervous and if we stumble over our words, it's because we are. And I say all of that in order to make the point that it's just how important these issues are and how critical this time is. And we thought we have to put our fears aside and show up and have this conversation for the sake of rurally based businesses, rural communities, and the rural livelihoods that we both care so deeply about. So having said that, I will now turn the floor over to Alessa to formally introduce you.
Thank you, Sherri. It's my great pleasure to introduce Senator Heidi Heitkamp. Senator Heitkamp is a lawyer, businesswoman, and politician. She served in the United States Senate from 2013 to 2019. She was the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from her home state of North Dakota, and she previously served as the North Dakota Attorney General and the State Tax Commissioner. Heitkamp grew up in a large family, same as me, small town of Mantador, North Dakota. Alongside her brothers and sisters, her 6 brothers and sisters, she learned the value of hard work, responsibility, leading her to choose a life of public service. Her reputation as an advocate for the people grew when she served as a leader in the national settlement with the tobacco companies that required them to tell the truth about smoke-related health risks and pay restitution to the states. As a former senator from one of the most rural states in the county, Senator Heitkamp has seen firsthand the slow erosion of rural support for Democrats, which led to Donald Trump being elected in 2016. She founded the One Country Project to reopen the dialogue between rural voters and Democrats and help remind Democrats that rural voters have traditionally been part of the Democratic coalition. Thank you, Senator Heitkamp, for joining us. It is such an honor to speak with you today about the current state of rural America as we count down to November's election.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. And oh my God, you guys are wonderful. Why you would ever be nervous is beyond me. I mean, we're just having a conversation here. And I want to kind of start out and talk about how women are changing the dynamic of rural America and how that the government ignoring rural America can affect what's happening with rural women-owned businesses. It's a story I like to tell, and it's kind of ironic because this constituent was not a constituent. She was, in fact, a resident of Minnesota, but we were doing a roundtable discussion about emerging technology businesses in rural America and what we could do that would actually help them. And she was running a really interesting kind of jewelry kit business, and it was just exploding, but she couldn't get the post office to take her packages in her hometown. I mean, she showed up with a truckload of boxes that she was delivering, you know, priority boxes that she was delivering to her to the post office to mail out because she had promised 2-day delivery. And as they were unloading them, the postmaster came out from that small town and said, "That's it. That's all we can take. You got to bring these other ones back tomorrow." And I was like, I mean, you're hearing so much about the post office today, but I can tell you stories after stories about the loss of service and service standards that dramatically affect businesses like hers and businesses, especially businesses that are doing small manufacturing that require remote sales, and what that means to America's opportunity that we're going to grow in our rural communities. And so there's a postmaster in Ada, Minnesota who doesn't like me very much, but we got her service that she needed to conduct her business. And you know, it's interesting because if you don't go out and ask, if you aren't at a round table where someone tells you that story, you don't know. Right. You don't know what's going on, and you don't have an opportunity to fix these problems or address the concerns that rural businesses and American agriculture and rural healthcare, you name it, put you know, teachers who teach in remote locations, the challenges that they have unless you show up. Yep. And so just to talk up politically a little bit, when I ran in 2012, Obama lost in North Dakota by 22 points, but I still was able to get elected. And I always thought that's the inflection point, that I could take on a 22-point headwind from the top of the ticket because I had a long-standing relationship with North Dakota, and especially rural North Dakota. They knew me, they knew who I was, they knew that they may not always like voting for Democrats, but they knew that I was going to stand up for them and make their life a little easier and bring that perspective to the United States Senate. When Donald Trump won North Dakota, he won by 36 points. We gave him the 4th highest percentage of any state in the union. And so the next time around, not only did we see this dynamic of the continuing hardening of rural America, and people who live in rural America not wanting to vote for a Democrat, even if they liked you. I mean, you know, if people would say, "I like her, but I'm for Donald Trump." Well, I mean, you know, that the idea is that I'm not going to vote for a Democrat because a Democrat won't fit my kind of idea of what a political profile of somebody who cares about rural America. And so when I got done and lost my race in 18, what I thought is, look, I have campaign dollars left over, and way too often politicians who have campaign dollars, they you know, put up a building at the university with their name on it, or and that's certainly within their rights. So they give it to you know, a book writer who writes a book about their life. You know, and I'm an old attorney general, and to me, people gave me that money to try and express a political point of view, and so I formed something called One Country, and it was born out of this idea that in spite of the New Deal, where FDR basically saved American agriculture by investing in farmers, in spite of the fact that during the 80s, we were the ones fighting for a farm bill and fighting for rural development and fighting for rural post offices and fighting that for education equality for children who live in rural America. I mean, I could go on the list. We somehow had lost the debate among rural constituencies. And so my my line is always, I formed one country with the leftover campaign dollars along with Joe Donnelly. I formed one country to reintroduce rural America to the Democratic Party, and equally important, the Democratic Party to rural America. And so we've been in the process of putting together white papers on, the kinds of stories that I just told you about what happened to this business owner in Ada, talking about rural healthcare and the challenges there, talking about rural broadband, talking about all these impediments to growing rural America, including the lack of housing. And so we're trying to kind of say, hey, look here is a body of issues. I do that not just because I want Democrats to win, but I do it because I think if rural America becomes a reliable one-party voter, they will lose the political power that they have. And if the Democratic Party does not reach out and understand the challenges of rural America, we will not become a governing party. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that in order to really be able to govern, you can't just look at blue states and red states. You have to look at, as Joe Biden said, being the president for all of America, even those people who didn't vote for you. And so it is so critical that we build this democratic infrastructure back in rural America. The other reason why, quite frankly, it is important is a lot of people talk about the Electoral College and, what does that mean? It is much less important from an Electoral College standpoint than it is from control of the Senate. North Dakota has 3 electoral votes. California has, gazillion of electoral votes in California. They have a large role to play in who gets picked for president of the United States, much higher than North Dakota. But guess what? California has 2 senators and North Dakota has 2 senators. Yeah. And that tells you that if we really want to move this country forward, and want to have the ability to govern, we have to start winning races again in states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Wyoming, Montana. And so we are deadly serious about policy, but we're equally serious about making sure that we deliver a democratic rural message. So I want to kind of end with this, and let you guys go to questions. But when people always say, well, you're from a small town, and when you say that, people in their minds, if they live in California, have a different vision of a small town than North Dakota. And I always say, no, it's not 90,000, it's 90. My family was 1/10 the population of Matador, North Dakota. When I went to law school, I challenged my law school classmates who wanted to send Christmas cards. I said, just send it to Heidi and the zip code and I'll get it. And I brought those cards back. And so I say that because there is something unique about kind of how you are raised in a rural area. And I'm not someone who says we're the real America. I think that's insulting to hardworking people all across this country. But I will say that it is a lifestyle choice that needs to be available to Americans. And we cannot just simply let our rural communities continue to dwindle and be challenged by addiction, to be challenged by low rates of healthcare, low quality healthcare, by substandard education. We have got to step up and say every area of this country matters. It's the dream of providing the wonderful choices that we have in this country of where we raise our children. And I think if COVID has shown anything, is that condensing a lot of people in a very small space may not be good for the country, but it also may not be good for our health. Yeah. And so I'm hopeful that COVID, one of the good things that can come out of this crisis, other than seeing what's so great about America and compassionate about America from our neighbors and friends, but one of the great things that can come is the recognition that we have a lot of opportunities in rural America, and this might be a lifestyle that you would enjoy but we need to create the infrastructure that gives you the opportunity to economically thrive in rural America. So with that, I'll turn it back to you guys, and you guys can ask me questions.
That's wonderful. And I to that last point, I do want us to dive into speaking about rural infrastructure. I do want us to dive a bit into the digital divide at later in the conversation, because it's something that's high on our minds as parents with young kids who need to be connected for school. Senator, if we can back up a bit and talk a bit about One Country, I'd love for you to talk a bit about the fund part, the One Country Fund. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the key races that we should be paying attention to this cycle, and which races we should frankly be contributing to, and which races the One Country Fund is prioritizing for this upcoming cycle.
One of the great frustrations of donors is that, it's kind of like the bright new topic, everybody rushes there. If it's voter suppression, then we're all going to raise money saying we're going to fight voter suppression, all these various independent organizations. Or if it's the post office, we're all going to raise money to fight for the post office, because that's what's on donors' minds, and you want to be able to respond and have the opportunity to have additional resources. That's not our theory. Our theory is that we should go where nobody else wants to go. We should go where we think there's real opportunity for change, and where people need some additional support. And so if you look across the country, there's a number of very well-funded races. Arizona comes to mind. Mark Kelly, we could run ads in rural Arizona. Guess what? We would be one of the many groups that are doing that. We could go, into other kinds of state races, and I won't mention them, but we just think that there's already a lot of participation and probably a lot of voter fatigue with advertising. And then we want to focus on those issues that can change the hearts and minds of rural voters. Now I'm going to give a plug, which Tessa just gets so mad at me. I'm going to give a plug for American Bridge. We had initially, just kind of to circle back, the One Country Project is a C4, which is a nonprofit, it's not a C3, which is what you're probably typically used to, where if you make a donation, you get a tax deduction. It's not that kind of nonprofit. It is an organizational nonprofit, political nonprofit. Contributions are not tax exempt, but then the proceeds aren't taxable either. So it's a special category. If you think the North Dakota Education Association, all of those groups tend to be C4s. If you're a C4, you can't do direct candidate advertising. And so what we did is we created One Country Fund. One Country Fund is a parallel organization, and there's political lines that are legal lines that you have to draw. But what it does is it basically allows us to run ads like we're running right now in Iowa. Direct ads that say, elect Teresa Greenfield because Joni Ernst has left you behind. She's not Iowa anymore. And so what we're doing with those dollars, because American Bridge, we initially thought we're going to work in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, rural areas there, because obviously, that's the blue wall that collapsed and gave us Donald Trump. And we started seeing some of the work that American Bridge was doing, where they were really focused on rural voters and very strategic in terms of the counties that were swing counties, very sophisticated campaign in rural America, using disaffected Republicans, people that looked like the people they were trying to persuade, people who in fact could be the neighbors of the people they're trying to persuade. And so we thought, look, they're doing a great job in Michigan, they're doing a great job in Wisconsin, they're doing a great job in Pennsylvania. So where should we go? And we said, look, what we know is the Midwest. We know that there's a race in Iowa where Tom Harkin, who is a champion of rural America, champion of the disabled, champion of so many causes, and unflinching populist progressive voice for rural America, we lost that that seat 6 years ago. We need that seat back. We need the voices of rural Iowa, progressive, advancing, not just corporate rural Iowa. We need the voices of rural Iowans in the United States Senate, and that's what we think Teresa will do. And so we're running an ad, made a huge investment in Iowa. We're definitely going to help any way we can in Montana. Bullock is a friend of mine, as you can imagine. Plus, Western North Dakota is pretty much Eastern Montana, and we feel like we know some of the issues there. So we'll be talking. We're watching the Kansas race. Kansas is interesting because it's a state that has been so solidly Republican, but it's always been represented by moderate Republicans. And it'll be interesting to see how the expanse of Kansas City creates opportunities there if you can pick up some more of those rural votes. And so what we're also looking at a couple of races in the East with Georgia, North Carolina, but that's going to depend on resources, and it's going to depend on, again, not duplicating other people's work just because it seems like a good idea for fundraising. We really want to be value added. Mm-hmm. And we also want to demonstrate that, issues that involve veterans are huge rural issues. They're big rural voting issues. Issues that involve ethanol, big rural voting issues in Iowa. Issues that involve the post office. I mean, people used to laugh at me because I was the queen of the post office when I was on Homeland Security, worked very close with Tom Carper, and ironically worked very closely with Mark Meadows on rural postal issues. And I'm feeling a little left out because they're grilling the postmaster this morning, and love to be part of that. Not very often I feel like, oh geez, I wish I was in Washington again. We're trying to get back the support that the Democratic Party had when FDR had their back, and when Bill Clinton had their back and brought back common sense policies, when Bill Sack and Obama had their back and made sure that they were that the farm program worked and that rural development was heavily invested. I can't tell you, and you guys probably know this too, the American Reinvestment Act that Joe championed and got passed, Joe Biden championed and got passed, was huge in terms of rural infrastructure for rural America. And so these are the things that we want to talk about, our record, but also what we're going to do.
Yeah. I think a good segue into some specific policy issues. And Alissa, I'd love to, if you want to dive into some of the ones that your community has asked you to propose, I think we should dive in that regard.
In my work, I've built a community of small-scale farmers that are committed to helping feed their communities, but they often struggle to pay their own bills. With the average age of the American farmer at 58, 57, how would you address helping make land and farm startup costs more financially feasible for young farmers without access to land, generational family wealth, or unbiased bank loans?
Well, the first thing I would say is that how important is healthcare to people making those decisions. So we have to make sure that they have access to affordable healthcare. That's true for all entrepreneurship, by the way. Yeah. It's interesting, the Harvard Business Review did a review of how important the Affordable Care Act was to entrepreneurship. That's definitely true in the cases that you're talking about. When people feel like they can have their health insurance, when health insurance is available to them, they can take more risk in their other life. We need a really meaningful, small entrepreneurial farming investment program. And it needs to be done through the USDA, and it needs to be through a guaranteed program, just like we've done in the past. And so when you look at these very large farm lending programs, or you look at, and a lot of your folks are probably tell you that the crop insurance program has driven land prices up, making them unaffordable, because we've taken so much risk out of farming that people take more risk in buying land or basically getting more land. We need to have a very targeted a very aggressive investment in small stakeholder farmers to bring that back. We need to eliminate and reduce consolidation in the food supply chain. We need to take a look at the farm to table for hot lunches and for food distribution centers for low income folks, so that your folks who maybe are growing vegetables, or maybe they're looking at, you know, a small strawberry, that we're ready to help them with the supply chain. But I think on land prices, we just need to recognize that those prices are what they are. We can all argue about why they're where they are, but we need to give some subsidy to these small stakeholder farmers, and then we need to back up any kind of loan guarantee so that they can capitalize what they're doing. And then it seems to me that we need to figure out how we can grow the co-op movement in those spots, so that the kind of transportation costs, the supply chain costs, you can in fact that's what the local elevator was about to begin with. That was how Senex started, right? Is that we're all going to gather together and we'll have economies of scale and be able to reduce our, you know, basically increase our buying power and reduce our operating costs. We need to get back to the original notion of what a co-op was supposed to be about. And we need to support those co-ops, and we need to grow them. And then finally, we need to have our land grant colleges not just do research on big grain farmers, but we need to make land grant investments in small stakeholder farmers and provide that support through extension for people who want to expand different lines of production and make sure that they have the research and have availability. You know, one of the programs, and I just want to put a plug in for the EQIP program. Are you familiar with EQIP?
No.
EQIP is a really interesting program, and who uses it is even more interesting to me. As ranches and farmers get bigger and bigger and bigger, what we said is, look, we think that you can produce more on a smaller patch if you're clever in how you do management of that land. And so it's a program that helps fund watering stations and fences. And so you graze one piece of your pasture pretty heavily, and then you let the animals move to the next while this one recovers. And what we've discovered is that you can raise more animals on a smaller patch of dirt, you know, in your farm, and you actually retain water, and it's better for the soils. So, and ironically, who uses this tends to be more evangelical kinds of folks, because they want the family to be able to produce and stay together, but they don't have the wherewithal like your group to, you know, expand their units. So they have to use what they have in a way that is much more strategic. And so I would love to hear kind of going forward from you some of your ideas other than what I just told you, because I get really excited when I talk about this, whether it's somebody growing hops. I don't know if you have anybody who are getting into the hops business, whether it's vegetables, whether it's container hydroponics, which I think is, you know, there's some folks who don't think that's agriculture. I think there's an incredible opportunity to grow fruits and vegetables in places like North Dakota using that kind of technology, and you can grow it in a way that's very green.
Well, this kind of segues perfectly into this other question. Another huge problem facing farmers right now. I've been photographing stories all across the country. There are some places that are having record droughts, and other areas are having record rainfall. There are fires raging throughout California right now, and farm workers are still out in the fields harvesting food because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. With unpredictable weather patterns tearing through America's rural landscapes, climate change is obvious. What can rural communities do to better prepare ourselves for climate change related natural disasters? And what can we do to help reduce our own community footprint?
Well, I mean, first off, farmers need to be part of the discussion about climate. And I think everybody kind of thinks, oh, you know, rural America, they think it's a hoax. They believe Donald Trump. That's not true. You know, the North Dakota REC, Rural Electric Co-op, every year, you know, they obviously do a lot of electrical generation. You know, they didn't wait for someone to sell them power. They generate their own through a distribution system. We're moving increasingly to wind and some solar in some locations, but pretty heavily invested in coal. And so they're always interested. You know, are our members concerned about climate? And consistently, 65 to 70% say they think this is real because they look out their window. And a lot of them don't talk about climate. They talk about, man, the weather's different, right? The weather is different. And so the first thing that we have to do is we have to get there and understand that this isn't a monolith, that rural America gets it, but they are very fragile economically and they don't want anything that's going to increase their costs. They've been told that this regulation that may be coming will increase costs of their electricity. It will further burden them. We need to start talking about the opportunities to play a role in changing, in addressing carbon emissions. You know, I've done a lot of work on this on the energy side. You know, I was the chief sponsor of something called 45Q, which is a carbon capture tax credit that the ethanol industry in North Dakota can use if they capture their CO2. Any industrial facility can use it. We need something like that. We need an incentive in rural America for people to use different kinds of tactics. And then we need to have a resiliency check. The EQIP program, you know, what happened, we had a drought in Western North Dakota, I think it was in 17 or 18, I can't remember which one of those years, really bad. Every farmer that had used EQIP and had done, you know, no-till, they were still getting crops. And everybody else who had used the old method, they were struggling. And so for the first time, a lot of these farmers looked across the fence and saw, hey, that guy still has cows and doesn't have to sell them because he's still got enough hay. What is he doing different than what I'm doing? And so that opportunity to say, this will make you more resilient if you use these kinds of conservation practices. If we do this kind of, we have an economic opportunity to participate in climate and carbon capture and solutions, but you also have an opportunity to understand the different things that people are doing right now to build resiliency. You know, here's an example. The rural electrics all across North Dakota, you know what they're doing? They're burying their wires. Why are they doing that? Because if an ice storm comes, the costs are catastrophic. And the loss of power can you know, mean that your cattle don't get water. And so we need to take a look around and say, these are the weather patterns. This is what climate is doing. We aren't going to solve this. We didn't get here, you know, in a day. We're not going to solve it in a day. We're going to move this forward. But what do we need to do working together to create resiliency? And that needs to be a major, major effort in combination with FEMA and, in my opinion, USDA.
Oh, sure.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, and this was not planned to, this wasn't a planned comment, but I know there's a lot of wide speculation that if Biden pulls this off, that you will likely be named Secretary of Agriculture. So I think, Alissa, to your question, that your community hearing that response is probably pretty encouraging if that turns out to be the case. I won't ask you to react to that, but just wanted to make that statement. Senator, if you don't mind, I do want to turn to a bit of a more social related question. And this for me, it's a hard question to pose, but I can't let this opportunity slip without doing it. As we all know, 2020 has been quite a year. I think with the pandemic and with the Black Lives Matter movement, this country has been turned on its head. You know, that we saw the Black Lives movement go from Portland, Oregon and Brooklyn, New York to Appalachia and rural Michigan. And as a Black woman from rural Georgia, it has been quite interesting to watch this. I mean, it really has. But I do think that in normal times, when there is when we're at our normal state, Black folks in rural America do feel unseen. I think that there's a sentiment that we feel ignored by political candidates, by the media, by decision makers at large. So I just love to hear your reaction to sort of that line of thinking and that feeling.
I absolutely couldn't agree more. When I say, what's your vision of what rural America is? People will think white farmer, maybe American Gothic, seed cap, broken down towns. And I say, no, it's Native American, it's African American, it's Asian American. Asian American producers, African American producers have been ignored for way too long. And you saw that in, my friend Sarah Vogel took on the Keep Siegel case, which was a case, that's a case about mineral rights, but took on the discrimination against lending in that community and the African American community. And so there's so many wrongs that need to be right and need to be addressed. And so this is what we're doing at One Country. I don't know if you're familiar with Anthony Daniels. Do you know who he is?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I tell you, he is a leader for the future. And he just has been working so hard in Alabama. For those who don't know, he is the minority leader of the Alabama House of Representatives, and African American, comes from a rural community, is an educator by trade, and an enormously talented public leader. And we just gave him, I think, $50,000 from a One Country fund or project to basically fund his efforts to do outreach. And by outreach, I don't mean just getting people registered and saying, I need your vote now, and then we're going to ignore you. But what are the unique needs of minority populations living in rural America? I have a pretty good handle on what that looks like in the Indian country, because that's that's my constituency here. But I think, number one, raising and elevating that awareness, that's look over here. You're all looking in the cities, look over here. And it was interesting. I was at maybe it was Aspen, and there was a woman who is working to try and reduce the restrictions that African American producers have, because all of their land was put in these land trusts. I don't know. I've never heard of this before. So here I am, one of the leaders in agriculture, had no idea that there was this restriction that families, African American families, through kind of that patriarchal system that happened after the Civil War, where they tied up their property and didn't give them control. So I think, we need to be better educated about what those challenges are. I want to kind of respond this way. All through North Dakota, even in rural communities, you had people standing in the corner in places like Rugby holding signs saying Black Lives Matter. So it's getting there. We'll get there. Yeah. We'll get there together. And it doesn't matter if you're in rural America or if you're in urban America. Everybody needs that opportunity. And one thing that we've always seen with the Native American community is they're always last. Yeah. To be the place where the investment happens. And that can't be true anymore. We've got to make those places first. And it's got to be about housing. It's got to be about education. It's got to be about economic opportunity. It's about reaching out to corporate America and saying, look, you now think everybody can work from home. Why don't you come here and do an education program in our high schools that will teach our kids coding, and then they can stay, especially among the Native community, staying on the reservation, staying with their families is a huge cultural pull. And to give them the opportunity to do that, but they can't do it if there isn't broadband. They can't do it if there isn't infrastructure. They can't do it if there isn't education. And so, I think they have to be the highest priority, those pockets of places that have been ignored for way too long. You know, the agricultural area, you know, you always think about the corn growers and the soybean growers and, you know, all the Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union. You know what? That's good, and we need to think, but that's not rural America.
Yeah.
Rural America is much more diverse than just commodity groups.
That's right. Yeah. I think I appreciate that. I appreciate that response. And Alissa, I think we maybe should turn to audience Q&A. Senator, I do want to ask one more question, and it relates to what you're talking about in terms of corporate public partnerships, and that relates to the digital divide. I think this pandemic has just really exposed us in terms of how wide that gap is between access versus non-access. And I think folks are starting to pay attention. I do think that there's so many piecemeal options and approaches out there now. And I wonder what your reaction to it is in terms of, should it be these piecemeal Band-Aids, or should there be a more national-wide holistic approach to address this issue head on? I know Maine has done, certain states and certain local jurisdictions have made some progress, but there's still, it's very scattered, it seems like.
Well, I mean, the Congress keeps investing money, and then, you know, it's not deployed the way it needs to be deployed.
Yeah.
I will say that. One of the things that I was very worried about, and I've since, you know, we passed the Farm Bill right before I lost my reelection. And so, you know, it's hard for me to know, but this was something that was very concerning to me, is that, you know, one of the things that these companies that'll apply for the digital money, they like to see concentration. And so are they going into areas that already have broadband and competing and using this money to compete against what's there? Or are they going to unserved or grossly underserved communities? And that should have been the priority from day one. You know, I'm going to put a plug in for North Dakota. North Dakota is probably, you know, with the exception of wireless, you know, cell coverage, North Dakota is probably the best connected rural state in the union. You know how we did that? We did that through our rural telecoms. You know, it used to be the rural telephone companies. Yeah. They don't even have telephone in their name anymore, because what they're delivering is broadband and digital to farms in the farthest corner of our state. My mother-in-law, you know, my husband grew up a family farmer. I grew up in town, 90 people, but my husband was a family farmer, and the farm's still in his family. His mother had better broadband than my sister did in Fargo. And that was because Byron Dorgan, our senator, made sure. That was because he said, look, we're all going to get together and we're going to do this together, and we're going to decide where that investment goes and what's the best place to deploy it. And so as a result, we have incredible connectivity here in North Dakota. The other thing that I would say is we need to better understand new technologies in broadband. He's probably not my favorite guy every day, but Elon Musk is doing a really interesting project, mainly looking at Africa and looking at underserved areas there. And at SpaceX, which is the organization that just launched, he's doing, I always say it looks like a Peds dispenser. It's like a little pod, he sends it up, and then it shoots out these low-flying satellites that then provide satellite coverage. So you get both the wireless and the high speed, and that high speed internet comes basically for free. You just pull it out of the sky. And so we need to understand where the technology is, because burying cables may not be the best thing for us in terms of investment. And so, you know, there's always somebody who wants to make money on it. And if you don't have principled leaders who say, no, this, you know, this is a public investment, and we're going to make sure that the public is served, you won't get the right results. And so we need a national strategy, but it has to prioritize grossly underserved and unserved areas. And if this pandemic, number one, has proven anything, it's that the money that we invested that should have been deployed may not have been deployed as quickly as what it should have been and as correctly as it should have been. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, I think we're gonna, we have a few questions that we received from our audiences before, so I'll turn to those before we wrap up here. Your time as senator, you worked with the Native tribes in your state to introduce the Native Voting Rights Act to help combat voter suppression. In your opinion, what needs to be done from a federal standpoint to repair relationships with our Native people and strengthen Native communities?
I mean, where do I start?
Yeah.
I mean, it would be nice if the president quit using Pocahontas as a pejorative. It'd be nice if he understood that Andrew Jackson should come off any dollar bill. It would be nice if he understood why people don't want to see Columbus in their town square or Custer. I mean, it would be nice if people really understood what's going on and not just rush to the latest issue, that this is long-term systemic racism that is embedded in our history, and it needs to be addressed. But it needs to be addressed respectfully in a government-to-government kind of relationship. We need to respect tribal governments and heritage and culture, and you know, the rich part of what Native businesses bring. Here's a great example: PPP, right? Program that's supposed to help Native, or supposed to help businesses. Native Americans couldn't access it. Food distribution programs, couldn't access it. All of the money that was supposed to be sent to combat health concerns got tied up. I mean, you know, where do I start? I mean, I think that everybody needs a history lesson on why things are the way they are. And then they need to understand that we signed treaties, agreements with tribes, and never honored them. Yeah. And so it has to, when you say, what do we need to do? We need to show some respect. Yeah. And we need to understand the history. And then one of the projects that was near and dear to my heart has been to address generational and childhood trauma. And that kind of education, trauma informed and trauma training, which if trauma goes unaddressed, the consequences long-term healthcare consequences are dramatic. And it's not just addiction and suicide, it's diabetes, it's cancer, it's all of those things that happen to us if we have a lower immune system, if we've hurt our immune system. And that's one of the things that epigenetics is telling us, that these things have to be addressed from a very, very root basis. And so I have a lot of opinions about this, but I would tell you, if you said, what can we do? Learn the history and lead with respect and honor our treaties. I mean, it's not any more complicated than that. And if we did that, we actually did that and understood that these are the first Americans, always are the last Americans. And, you know, Jody Gillette, I just want to tell a story about Jody. Jody Gillette, who's a great friend of mine, she was Obama's liaison to the tribes, worked in the White House. Jody, I had her on one of the podcasts. If you're interested, listen to Jody's podcast on One Country. And we were talking about Black Lives Matter. And I was kind of like, you know, we're addressing all these issues, but no one's mentioning Native Americans. And she said, it's their story. You know, we're going to support them. You know, our time will come. And so it's interesting to hear the perspective and how respectful she was of not saying me too, but saying, I need to understand their story and support them because they're going to support us.
Yeah. That's
I guess I'll have one more, and then Sherri, do you want to ask a couple of your community questions?
Sure.
So soil erosion and degradation is a major problem facing growers all over the world from decades of commercial fertilizer, pesticide use, and overtilling. Regenerative agriculture practices have been proven effective in restoring fertility of poor quality soil. How would you restructure our agriculture subsidies programs to encourage more farmers to adapt organic and regenerative farming practices in the future?
The first thing that I would say is read a report that just came out about the Green Revolution. I don't know if you saw that, right? It's about philanthropy in Africa, and everybody's like green, green, green. And full disclosure, I'm a trustee for Howard Buffett on his foundation, and Howard has been a leader in conservation. If you want to read a really interesting book about what's happening in Africa, read 40 Chances, his book about the work that he's done to try and restore soils. I mean, depleted soils that have been produced and not maintained in Africa. He takes that work very seriously and has written and done incredible research in conjunction with land-grant colleges on farming practices that really look at soil conservation and soil erosion. Now, a lot of times soil conservation in kind of that no-till area involves heavy injection of chemicals. And so, the regenerative, restorative, worms are great. The soil is alive, and you've got to figure out how you're going to manage that soil in a way that continues that biodiversity, that continues to break down the organic and create the fertilizer right there in place. And I think it needs to be a major initiative. There's a lot of great work that's done by soil conservation entities and throughout the country, but we need to take a look at how we can make that work, expand that work. In Western North Dakota, we have a lot of no-till. We have a lot, that's just kind of, people have adapted. Not so true in Eastern North Dakota, where people have come to rely on soil that's been, some of the best soil in the world is in Eastern North Dakota and Western Minnesota. And I think sometimes we take advantage of it when we should be taking better care of it. But there's a lot of work being done, and I think it's a very smart question on how do we make the soil health a major priority. And what's interesting is this is, again, the intersection between climate and soil, because I think we're going to see incentives for sequestering organic material, making sure that we're lowering our carbon footprint in our farming practices, and a lot of that is going to be based on soil conservation.
Great. Yeah. Senator, I think this question just came in on the Q&A, and I think it's a good one, so I will pose it. And bluntly, it's, do you have plans to seek elected office again?
The answer would be no. I love my state of North Dakota, but it's going to, as we work to, again, improve the Democratic brand in rural communities in states like mine, it's going to take a generation and a lot of really good ideas. And so my goal is to create a political climate for the next young girl who wants to be like Heidi Heitkamp and run for the Senate, and who shares my democratic ideals, to get that ground plowed and that probably shouldn't say that, but get it prepared, get that soil prepared for her to have an opportunity to run for office.
I love that. There's so many other questions here in the chat. We're running out of time. I want to give you an opportunity to provide closing statements in terms of what folks on this call can tactically do today to help ensure that Donald Trump is not reelected to the White House. I'd love just to kind of hear your perspective on that, whether it's from how they can get involved with one country, or what can we truly do starting now between today and November the 3rd?
I think the one thing that I would ask everyone is, number one, vote, and make sure that your family votes. Don't think it doesn't count because you live in Alabama or you live in North Dakota. We need to have that reassurance that there's people who share our values. And so even if we lose 60-40, I always remind people, over 140,000 people in North Dakota voted for me. And I've had greater percentages than that in the past. And so these are the kinds of things that build the movement. So vote yourself. one of the things that I've been talking a lot about, and it's how cowed, and I mean that, from the standpoint of, man, everybody is, all the Trump people are just so in your face, and if you don't support them and you're unpatriotic and you're this and you're that, steel yourself and quietly say, this is why I'm voting for Joe Biden. I have to say, give a couple examples. At the time of COVID, I've turned into I've got to get on my bike every day because I've got to, get that endorphins going. Otherwise I go crazy. And I was on a bike path and I saw a big blue sign and I thought, oh man, it's going to be one of those Trump signs. And, so I kind of glanced over kind of unwillingly, and it was a big sign that says, "Stop the lies, Biden." And so I tell you that story because you have neighbors who are very unhappy about what's going on. We're seeing polls now where, the support among farmers, although it's not dramatically sliding, is waning a little bit. There's opportunities to convince your friends and your neighbors and the people you go to church with, the people who are in your sewing circles or your, exercise clubs or your, wherever it is that you gather and get together, your book clubs. I know what those are because I have nieces. Your book clubs, and just especially women. I think women are going to revitalize rural America. But we need to have a place in rural America. We need to have a voice in rural America. And I think women's voices need to be heard. And, we need, because we're going to fight for kindergarten and we're going to fight for daycare in rural America. And we're going to fight so that disabled children have opportunities to live with their families in rural America. That's what we're about. And so understand why it is that you feel so strongly, not against Trump. Don't argue about the Trump stuff. Talk about what Biden's going to do and talk about what he's going to bring and how he cares about families like yours, and that, you have to give him a chance because we can't stand 4 more years of this. And rural America is not doing better under Donald Trump. We're getting a lot of lip service, but no real action. And so, it's time for a change.
That's great.
100%. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
You guys are wonderful. It's fun to chat with you.
You as
Keep up your
well.
good work. And 40 Chances, read the book. Also on his website, on Howard's website, is a whole discussion about soil conservation in this country and the work that he's done. And then every extension office and USDA has a lot of discussion. And one of the things, one more story. I always had the FFA kids in, so I just get them in, get a chair for all of them in my office, and I would have a little round table with them. And kid came in, and I don't know if he had a MAGA hat on or not, but came in and his hat was pulled over his eyes, and you could tell you didn't really want to be there. And I started talking about soil conservation because, like I said, in my office, I had a soil column. I mean, nobody else in the Senate had a soil column prominently displayed in their front office. And I started talking about soil conservation. And this kid lifted up and he started talking about working for this farmer in Oaks, North Dakota, and what they were doing for the soil and how excited he was. And it was just like transformative. And so, and every other young man who maybe was more hip or more cool in that group, watched as we talked about this excitement he had about restoring soils. And, that's what we need. We need to have those young leaders who are connected in ways, but we won't get there if we don't talk to them. And that's why it's so important that we do that outreach and that we do the work.
Yeah. Which I think is one of the reasons why we thought it was important to have this conversation, because it's just that. I mean, you still have to reach out to people, and people can be convinced. It's not too late.
Yeah, and check out, one last plug, check out One Country Project. It has a lot of lot of political research about how important getting the rural vote back is to the Democratic Party, but it also has a lot of policy issues. It has a lot of really great kind of, this is what's on the minds of people. We tracked impeachment. We tracked COVID, rural attitudes about COVID. Trump really took a hit in rural America over COVID. And the other thing is, why people in this country are so dismissive of the fact that this is a pandemic that hits our seniors so hard. I don't understand that. I don't understand how people can say, oh yeah, but they're old. I mean, we don't know when our time is, and everybody is entitled to enjoy and live a quality life in the time that they have. And so to dismiss, and that's a big rural voting issue too, is healthcare and senior issues. So I'm hopeful. You guys are great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Heitkamp, for taking the time out of what I know is your very extremely busy schedule right now to spend an hour with us. And I also wanted to thank everybody who's joined this webinar. Thank you for tuning in. I apologize if we weren't able to get to your question. Like I said, or like Sherri said, 1 hour is never enough time to discuss all of the issues that are facing our country right now. But please visit One Country Project's website if you'd like to get involved. And I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to Sherri Powell, who really spearheaded this whole thing. Please visit Yours Rurally, her website. All of the beautiful handcrafted gift boxes that she offers support the efforts and livelihoods of rurally based businesses. And if you maybe aren't living in a rural area yet, but you want to move to a rural area, check out Urban Exodus, because I have features from farmers and businesses and people who've been living in rural areas from all over the country. So Sherri and I are thinking of continuing these conversations up until the election, and I welcome your feedback for ideas and potential guests. So thank you again for joining us, and wishing everyone a safe, healthy, and joyous weekend.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you so much.
You guys are great. Keep up your great work.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.